Pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now ready to receive motions for the position of chair. If members could indicate by either using the raise hand function or by indicating their intention, I would appreciate it. Okay. Je vois Monsieur Paulus.
Mr. Paulus. Good morning, Mr. Clerk. I move that Mr. Kitchen become the chair of this committee. Mr. Paulus suggested Robert Kitchen as the chair of this committee.
Raise. Do you want to make? Do you want to nominate somebody?
Mr. Paulus beat me to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Are there
we need
any
an election?
Are there any other nominations for the position of chair? Pursuant to the order adopted by the House on Wednesday, September 23rd, any motion received, if there's only one motion, will proceed immediately to the decision-making process. Does the committee wish to adopt the motion? Seeing no disagreement, I declare the motion carried, and I announce that Mr. Robert Kitchen has been duly elected chair of the committee. Congratulations, Mr. Kitchen. I will ask you now to take over presiding the meeting at this time.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you everybody for that confidence. Paul, I didn't get a chance to say whether I actually would accept the nomination. Is that part of the procedure, or?
Curiously enough, Mr. Kitchen, it isn't really a nomination at the House of Commons. It's actually a motion, and there is no provision. Once the motion's made, it's in the hands of the committee. You would have needed unanimous consent to withdraw it. So unless your only option now, if you don't want to be chair, would be to resign. But however, unfortunately, there is no provision for us to ask if a candidate accepts a nomination.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and I look forward to your wise and astute guidance as we go forward. I've had the opportunity to talk with the previous chair, Tom Lukiski, about the committee, and he's told me wonderful things about the committee. Tremendous work that it has done working together in the past, and I look forward to doing the same as we move forward and work together on this. Just a heads up for those who don't know me or have not met personally. I am a chiropractor of trade. I've been a member of Parliament for the last 5 years, and before that, I was the registrar for the chiropractic profession in Saskatchewan, and I was the national president for the regulatory board throughout Canada. So I have some experience along those lines in dealing with the committees. Also, I spent many years, and I'm qualified as coaches at many levels, but as a hockey coach. And I spent a lot of time watching parents with stopwatches as their childs play out on the ice and how much ice time they get. So I'm very familiar on trying to make certain that the timing is appropriate and that we stay on that track. And that's what I look forward to doing, is making sure that this committee stays on time. And so I do ask of everyone to make certain that when you put forward your questions, that you recognize that the time allotted is time for not only your question, but also for the answer. And we want to make certain that we try and adhere to that rule as much as possible. And recognizing that once in a while, sometimes we might go longer a little bit, but we will try to make certain that if that does happen, it's evenly dispersed. So with that said, Mr. Clerk, I think the next steps are for routine motions. Is that correct?
If I may, Mr. Chair, 2 points to raise. The first is if you could ask, when you have an opportunity, one of your staffers to email the OGGO inbox with your cell phone number. In the event I need to communicate with you privately, this would be an opportunity for us to do so.
Okay.
Committees are not obliged to proceed to the election of vice chairs after the election of the chair. However, committees often do. It's entirely at the committee's discretion if it wishes to proceed to the election of vice chairs now or routine motions. My recommendation would be that we deal with the vice chair issue and then the routine motions, but again, it's at the hands of the committee.
I suggest we go ahead and choose our vice chairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Under the standing orders, the clerk does preside over the election of the vice chairs. And so if you will allow me, I will proceed to that right now.
Please do so.
Conformément à l'article 106 du
Pursuant to Standing Order 106, the Vice President can be an MP from the government. I am ready to get the motion for the Vice President. I suggest Mr. Drouin. So Mr. Drouin has been suggested. Are there any other nominations for the position of Vice President or Vice Chair, rather? Seeing no other nomination, does the committee want to approve the motion and elect Mr. Drouin as Vice Chair?
Carried, and Mr. Drouin duly elected first Vice Chair. I will now proceed to the election of the second Vice Chair.
Monsieur le Président.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gerritsen, I see your hand raised. Did you wish to intervene?
No, sorry, that was when Mr. Kitchen was suggesting that we go to routine motions. My hand is raised for that section of it. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Gerritsen. Le deuxième vice-président est...
The second Vice Chair should be a member of the official opposition. Any nominations for the position of the second Vice Chair? Ms. Vignola? So I think that someone was supposed to suggest my name. Sorry. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I suggest Ms. Vignola as the second Vice Chair of this committee. Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon is suggesting that Ms. Vignola become the second Vice Chair of this committee. Are there any other nominations for the second Vice Chair of this committee? No? All right. Is this committee ready to elect Ms. Vignola as the second Vice Chair of this committee?
Declare the motion carried, and Madame Vignola duly elected second Vice Chair of the committee. I will now hand the meeting back to Mr. Chair, Mr. Kitchen, with thanks.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. And now I gather we now would step into the issue of routine motions, correct?
Yes, we can, Mr. Chair. Copies of the routine motions were sent out to all members yesterday. I see Mr. Gerritsen would like to intervene, and I see Mr. McCauley would like to intervene as well. Maybe worthwhile for members to continue using the raise hand function so that we can track who wishes to intervene next. Mr. Chair, I have a list of the routine motions here. My recommendation would be that the committee proceed one at a time through them to ensure that there's clarity as to what's being adopted. But you may want to take that issue up with the committee itself. As I said, Mr. Gerritsen and Mr. McCauley both have their hands raised.
Thank you. And I mean, I would think before we do that, we do go one by one, but I will listen. Mr. Gerritsen, I think your hand was up first. Yeah,
I was just going to move those if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I'll go one by one at if that's your preference.
I would prefer. I think we go one by one, but I'll.
That was going to be my suggestion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you from Ms. McCauley. So is the committee comfortable with going one by one? And we'll just go through the list as they were presented to us by the clerk. Do I see nodding of heads? Okay with that? Okay. So we'll go with the first motion, which is the analyst services. And the first motion being that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair, the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its works. Do we have concurrence for that? I see hands, thumbs up, and just a point so that people know, if you go back historically, the thumbs up actually is the negative and the thumbs down is the positive, but we'll look for thumbs up as positive in this manner. So, okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just as a point of clarification for the benefit of the members, traditionally the analysts are visible to the committee with their cameras on during a regular committee meeting. In light of the fact they're only attached to the committees now, their cameras have been off. However, I have asked them now to turn their cameras on. And if you permit, Mr. Chair, the analysts can introduce themselves if you wish to allow that.
Certainly, I'd be very happy to say hello and meet them so everyone knows.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Raphael de Rasp, and I've been with the committee for the last 5 years, and I'm happy to be back. Pleased to meet you.
Pleased to meet you, and thank you for coming back. Hello.
Good morning. I'll say hello. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to supporting the work of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and nice to meet you both. And we look forward to working for long hours and getting things done right. So, okay, we'll go to the second, which is Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure. That Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be established and be composed of 5 members, namely the chair and 1 member from each recognized party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration. Seeing of hands, thumbs up. Carried. Meeting with the quorum. The chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence printed when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition and 2 members of the government. But when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of members present. Is that everyone is comfortable with that? And call for thumbs up. Carried. I better mark those off. So the next time for opening remarks and questions of witnesses. In the past, what has happened is the witnesses be given 10 minutes to make their opening statement. That at the discretion of the chair during the questioning of witnesses, there be allotted 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party as follows: Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. That for the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes, Conservative Party 5 minutes, Liberal Party 5 minutes, Bloc Québécois 2.5 minutes, and New Democratic Party 2.5 minutes. Any questions? I see hands up. We'll start. Mr. Gertson, you had your hand up first, at least on the.
Yeah, that was from before. I'll take it down. Sorry about that.
Is that an old?
J'aurais une suggestion à vous faire. Oh, Monsieur Green, vous aviez une suggestion à faire?
Do I have the floor, Mr. Chair?
I actually, if your hand was, I mean, I saw Ms. Vignola's first, but she's right in the middle of but if whatever you would prefer.
No, my apologies.
Yeah.
I should note that there's been some back and forth with the translation, so I'll just make sure I switch back. Thank you.
Okay. We'll go to Ms. McDonald first.
Okay.
I am going to speak French, and so I'm going to put myself on the French channel. I have a suggestion, and I want to tell you what POC adopted and see if if you agree with that. That there be given 5 minutes for the witnesses. That's 5 instead of 10, and that as far as possible, the witnesses be asked to provide their testimony in advance and at the discretion of the chair. 6 minutes be given to the first speaker of each party. So there would be no change for the first round, but the second and subsequent rounds, things would go as follows. The Conservatives 5, the Liberals 5, the Bloc 2.5, the NDP 2.5, Conservatives 5, Liberals 5. So instead of having 5 minutes for the Conservatives and Liberals, one after the other, that is the first 4 turns, it would be the Bloc and the NDP in between the 2 turns of the Conservatives and Liberals for those second and subsequent rounds.
Did you want to?
I think now's the appropriate time just to acknowledge the fantastic work of our previous chair, Tom Lakitsky, who is now on PROC, and reference that our committee, working in collaborative spirit, actually made this a practice throughout COVID. So I just want to take this moment and acknowledge his past chairpersonship, and obviously support this to ensure that we have equitable interventions. Thank you for bringing it up to the honourable member, Ms. Vignola.
Mr. McCauley, I saw your hand up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Paul, could you run, Mr. Clerk, could you run through what we did most recently from the last group of meetings? I think that worked very well, and I would think that maybe we could just stick with what had worked before.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. The motion that existed originally is the one that the chair read. However, that did give discretion to the chair. The motion that Mr. Kitchen read, which was the original one in effect, gave discretion to the chair, who at the time was Mr. Lakitsky, to make modifications as he saw fit, which he did quite regularly. And he did it based on the amount of time left, and he was able to manage that situation. I never heard any complaints from members about how he did that, but it was the original motion that existed at that time was the one that Mr. Kitchen read. The one that Madame Vignola read was actually adopted by PROC during their first meeting, I believe, last week.
Yeah, and I don't know, Mr. McKinnon, because you've been here from the beginning as well. I think how we had it recently worked very well and seemed fair, but also allowed a bit of discretion when we needed to perhaps limit witness time. I think that worked well. I'd prefer to stick with the original.
I would concur.
Mr. Paulhus?
Well, thank you. I think that we don't unfortunately have a chance with Zoom meetings to really talk among ourselves, but I think we should do things the way POC is doing them, because I think that's more fair and it's the way things are going right now.
And then Mr. Gertson.
Yeah, I just want to note that although our previous chair was good in his discretion, there were times when we were pushed out for various reasons, technical reasons, from our last round. And I think that PROC very rightly in their wisdom with Mr. Lukowski have identified this as being a standard, being kind of the preeminent committee on committees. And I would strongly, in that collaborative spirit, suggest that we carve this out in the way that it's been presented by Ms. Vignola, so that we take the burden off of Mr. Kitchen as the chair to have to make decisions in the fly that may or may not kind of impact the way that we're able to collaboratively work together.
And there is any more discussion? Mr. Gertz.
Thank you very much, Robert. And by the way, I serve on the PROC committee with Tom, and he's very knowledgeable, and you have big shoes to fill. But congratulations on your new position. I just want to say that on PROC committee, we had a lot of debate and discussion around this. We ended up coming down on the way that has been proposed by Madame Vignola. And the way that we left it was that if there was any time after the expiration of the way that it was laid out, that then the chair could use that additional time at their discretion to share amongst the various different committee members. So just a thought as there's some deliberation on this.
Do I see any other hands? Mr. McCauley.
Oh, sorry. Thanks very much for everyone's input, and I'm fine with what Mr. Paul Hoos was saying. I'm sorry I'm flip-flopping a bit, but not a hill to die for, but I'm fine with following up with Mr. Paul Hoos's comments.
Okay. I mean, ultimately, and I appreciate the kind words, and correct, I do have some huge shoes to fill in this role, and I look forward to that opportunity. I do want to make certain that all members of committee get an opportunity to have their question. I've noticed in my years on Veteran Affairs Committee as well as HISA, on that aspect, as times get tight, that the sometimes the block or to, and I want to make certain that that is recognized throughout, and they do get those opportunities, and they aren't being shortchanged when we get into those situations. But at this point in time, you basically have put two proposals in front of us. One is what we've gone with the past, and the other is to reword it such that during the second round that we go 5 minutes Conservative, 5 minutes Liberal, 2.5 Bloc, 2.5 NDP, 5 minutes Conservative, 5 minutes Liberal. And so I guess I will ask for a vote on that, and if accepting that, we will go that route, and if not, then we will stay with what is there. Yes, Ms. Vignola. Go ahead, Ms. Vignola.
Rapidement,
my motion suggested to decrease the allocated time to witnesses, so there will be more times for questions.
That's correct, and that is, I think that is, it is, yes, to make certain that we're voting on that part as well. Correct, that the go from 10 minutes to 5 minutes per witness, as well as the change in times.
Mr. Chair, I have found the copy of the motion that was adopted by PROC, which I believe is the same as the one Madame Vignola had read out. If you wish, I can read it back to the committee to ensure that they know what they're voting on.
I would appreciate that. Thank you very much.
The motion that was adopted by PROC is that witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statements, that whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statements 72 hours in advance, that at the discretion of the chair, during the questioning of witnesses, there be 6 minutes for the first questioner of each party as follows. Round 1, Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes. Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes. New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes. Conservative Party, 5 minutes. Liberal Party, 5 minutes.
Mr. Gertson, you have a point on the motion?
Sorry, are we reading it out to vote on it, or is it still debatable?
I was under the impression that we had finished the debate on it and
Okay.
we were moving it out for the vote on it.
Okay, I was just going to explain why we chose to reduce it to 6 minutes at proc, but I'm happy to just proceed with the vote.
So calling for the vote, all those in favor? And I'm seeing pretty well unanimous, so we will make that change. Thank you very much, everybody, for that. Well done. That's the first vote that we've run, and I'm so happy. I'm chaired a vote.
Ellie, I tried to help you there.
Okay, we'll move on to document distribution. That the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee only when such documents exist in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly. Any discussion on this?
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Polhus, thank you. Yeah, it's very important. I explained the same in other committees. Often documents are only in English, and there's no French version because of a lack of time. So I think it's important to make sure that documents will always be translated into French for Francophone speakers. Thank you.
Basically requires that to happen, and I think it's correct that when we distribute unless we seek permission from the whole board to have something put out, or sorry, from the whole committee to have it put out in one language, that we require everything to be in both languages. Any other discussion on this? Seeing none, raise of hands on those in favor. And it appears to be carried. Next is working meals. That the clerk of the committee be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees. Any discussion? Are those hands up or discussion? Let's discussion first, please. Mr. Gertsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the other changes that we've made in PROC, which I think would be appropriate for your committee as well, would be at the end of this where it says subcommittees, comma, provided that members have confirmed their physical presence for the meeting. So this would put the onus on the members to tell the clerk that they will be there, so that the clerk can then provide meals. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of meals when a number of people are virtually attending, and it would be a waste.
Certainly. Any further discussion? Ms. Vignola, you did have your hand up, or is that along the same lines?
Main levée. Je vous remercie.
Yes. It's a good idea to confirm our attendance with the clerk. However, I think we can afford to pay a muffin before going to a meeting. How about not having any working meals? I believe that with our salary, we can totally afford to buy working meals. I mean, I'm open to any suggestions, but I don't see why we wouldn't be able to afford any working meals.
Yes, Mr. Gertsen.
I guess I have the benefit of having been through this debate already in PROC, and we had a lengthy discussion on this. And there were multiple different reasons why members were advancing different ideas, which is how we came to conclusion on this particular wording. But we had the exact same discussion, and we said, why is it necessary, given the fact that we're in a pandemic? Do we really need meals to be delivered to us? And the way that we, in PROC at least, determined that we would do this is that and I agree totally with what Ms. Vignola is saying. there's no reason why we can't get our own food, even if it's just from upstairs and we're in West Block, and bring it. The way that members decided that they would proceed on this is that if they are going to attend in present, they were going to be present in person, they would do so in a way that they would inform the clerk they're going to be there, but didn't require the meal. I think that at the end of the day, this was just giving the clerk the ability to do it if he or she had to, and that's why we came down on that wording. But if this committee chooses, if this committee chooses to strike that and just to take the whole part out, I'm definitely supportive of that.
Thank you. We're going to go with Mr. McKinnon, then Mr. McCauley, and then Mr. Paul Hoos.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't have my hand up.
Okay, sorry, I thought it was Mr. McCauley.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to agree with Ms. Vinola. I mean, obviously we're, it's just virtual right now, and I see no point in using up taxpayers' money. So just to back up Ms. Vinola's comments.
Mr. Paul Hoos.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Working meals would be for people who are attending committee meetings in Ottawa. But if meetings are in the West Block, the cafeteria is open, so we could make some arrangements. But in the Wellington building, there is no cafeteria, so that might be the reason why Proc said what it said. But I don't think it's a pressing need. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand the rationale, and I think that for people who may only be serving on one committee, they would have the time allocations to do that. But before I vote in support of striking the ability to provide food, has it been in the past a custom, or is there an availability for staff to also access the snacks? Because while we're meeting virtually, while our meetings tend to be short, I just imagine times where we might be hours in a committee meeting on a particular topic without the ability to retreat. And there's also a cost allocation to us sending our staff off-site to go pick up food somewhere. And I've come from city council where we've had these conversations numerous times as well. And at the end of the day, it always occurred to us that the $5 sandwich was a time cost savings in terms of allocation from the work that we do to be able to take time to go off and get food or bring food. Having said that, I'm also proud to say, Mr. Clerk, that I'm down 20 pounds. I'm on a very restricted diet. I won't be able to have those tasty little donuts that you purchased anyways. So I'm out. I wouldn't even be eating the food. I'm just saying that from time to time, if there was apples available for staff and other people, I don't see that as being an atrocious use of taxpayer time and money.
I think the donuts are a personal attack on me, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Green, and I appreciate your comments because as you said, the bottom line, staff are there in those meetings, and ultimately, if it's in Wellington, they can't access the cafeterias as well. So that's a good point. At this point, I think maybe we should move forward with the recorded division on this, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the recorded division will be on the amendment of Mr. Garrettson to add to the motion at the end, provided that members have confirmed their physical presence at the meeting. Okay. And I will proceed with the roll call on this. Mr. Garrettson.
On the amendment, yes.
Mr. Johari.
On the amendment, yes.
Mr. Kosmierczak. Unfortunately, I cannot hear you, Mr. Kosmierczak.
Support.
Thank you. Mr. McKinnon.
Oui, j'appuie.
Mr. Weiler.
Support.
Mr. Lloyd.
Support.
Monsieur Paul Huss,
Oui.
Monsieur Macaulay,
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Madame Vinola,
D'accord. Et si ma question de tantôt est devenue une motion, vous pouvez le...
If my question earlier became a motion, you can strike that.
oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Green, I didn't hear your voice.
I didn't hear it. I'm going to just share with you on the record, there's a lag with my translation where it's cutting out some of the intervening discussions. And so anyways, I'm supporting it.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, 10 in favor and 0.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you, everybody. And we will make those amendments. Okay, the next point, travel, accommodation, and living expenses of witnesses. That if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, provided that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair. Any discussion? Seeing none, thumbs up. Carried. Access to in-camera meetings. That unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to have 1 staff member at all in-camera meeting. That should be meetings. And that 1 additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present. Discussion? Mr. Paul Huss.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that the government and the opposition have representatives of the whip in those committees. Are those people included? Because if we say only 1 person per MP, it might not be enough. So are the whip representatives included?
Additional person for each House officer's office be allowed to be present.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I believe the definition of House officer's office has been sufficiently fluid to allow to be considered to include the whip's office. That is to say that in addition to each member having a staff member at an in-camera meeting, it would also include somebody from the whip's office. Where this may be problematic now in this context is in the COVID context. In hybrid meetings, there may not be enough seats in the room for everybody. However, this is a routine motion that's adopted. It was adopted back in the time when we were meeting entirely in person and there were sufficient seats. I might suggest that the committee may want to adopt this to allow for the possibility of it, while keeping in mind the Board of Internal Economy has adopted provisions to reduce the presence of staff at committee meetings simply due to the ongoing pandemic. Again, the pandemic won't be there forever, and it is possible in the future these provisions won't be in place. But I do want to raise this issue with the committee that there are less opportunities for staff to appear at hybrid meetings. That's the understanding I've received. Thank you.
Mr. Paul Huss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sure that the clerk is right. We're in a hybrid situation, and we've got in-camera meetings that require no extra members of staff, so we can deal with that, I think. If I may, Mr. Chairman, I have always heard that that in from interpretation that, or rather that the interpretation of this phrase is that it does include the people from the whip's offices. So I just want to point out that having extra people in the room may be problematic right now in this situation that we're in.
Discussion? Seeing none, I will call for thumbs up or thumbs down for this this motion. Thumbs up. Carried. Okay, transcripts of in-camera meetings. That one copy of the transcripts of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff. Any discussion? Seeing none, thumbs up, thumbs down. And I see thumbs up, carried. Notice of motion. That a 48 hours notice interpreted as 2 nights shall be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee, unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration, provided that 1, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday, that 2, the motion be distributed to members in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted if it was received no later than the deadline hour. And that 3, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day. And that when the committee is traveling outside of the parliamentary precinct, no substantive motions may be moved. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call one more time. Any discussion? None? Thumbs up? Carried. Orders of reference for the House respecting bills. That in relation to orders of reference from the House respecting bills, A, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill, which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider. B, suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A at least 48 hours prior to the start of clause by clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate shall be deemed to be proposed during the said consideration, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect to a given bill. And C, during the clause by clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Mr. Wheeler, you have a discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for information, my last name is pronounced Weiler. Sorry, I meant to raise my hand to get on the speaking list after we're done with routine motions.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I apologize. I'll figure it out. I'm not so worried about yours. Mr. Johari's I can do, but Mr. Kuzmiski, is that close?
Kuzmierchuk.
Kuzmierchuk. Okay, I'll get it.
That's pretty good, Mr. Kitchen. Kuzmierchuk.
Well, the CZYK back in Saskatchewan has a little bit of a change. Anyway, seeing no further discussion, thumbs up or thumbs down? I see thumbs up in favor, carried. Okay, those are the routine motions that I have.
Smerchuk and Kitchen, that sounds like a top a top defense pairing on a, Western Hockey League team.
The KK line. Yes, Mr. Green.
As long as there's not another K on that, we're good.
Yes,
if I could go after Mr. Weiler, I do want to test the will of the committee on getting rolling, getting right back to business here.
Okay.
Myself as well after Mr. Green.
Okay, so we'll go Mr. Weiler and then Mr. Green and then Mr. McCauley at this point.
Great. Okay,
go ahead, Mr. Weiler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'd like to propose is that pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, that the committee conduct a 16-meeting study on A, federal shipbuilding, B, ship procurement, C, the polar icebreaker, and D, the effects of COVID-19 on shipyard construction and delivery, and that the committee report its findings to the House by November 26, 2020.
And just so Mr. Clerk, I'm going to defer to you. Is it best for us to hear all or to debate one at a time?
My recommendation is you deal, Mr. Chair, one motion at a time. It would create too much confusion.
Okay.
Procedurally, we can't entertain another motion until the previous motion is disposed of. If I could ask Mr. Weiler, for my benefit, if he could read the motion again so I can make sure I have all of the elements of it, I would appreciate that, please.
Absolutely. Okay, one more time here. So that pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, the committee conduct a 16-meeting study on A, federal shipbuilding, B, ship procurement, C, the polar icebreaker, and D, the effects of COVID-19 on shipyard construction and delivery, and that the committee report its findings to the House by November 26, 2020.
Thank you. Any discussion on that?
Absolutely.
Mr. Green. Mr. Green, sorry, just for a sec. I saw Mr. Green, Ms. Vignola, and then Mr. McCauley.
While I can appreciate that the government side would want to turn the page on a new agenda for this committee, notwithstanding all of the critical studies that we had undertaken prior to their rather abrupt prorogation, I would suggest that that we continue the course that we had set prior to the abrupt prorogation of this committee, the dissolution of this committee. And at the appropriate time, I will not be supporting this, nor their turn the page agenda. And at the appropriate time, I will be requesting that we commence the bulk of the work that we had prior to the very abrupt dissolution of this committee at prorogation.
Ms. Vignola.
The suggestion made by Mr. Weiler is interesting because it overlaps one of my concerns. If we could add the criteria for prioritizing shipbuilders for the national shipbuilding strategy, that would be good.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weiler, thanks for putting that forward. I think we're down to myself, Mr. McKinnon, and Mr. Druin from the 2015 class on OGGO, and those two will know I've been after a shipbuilding study for a long time, and generally I do support it. There are a couple issues with it, though. Of course, the mains dropped very recently, the estimates. So, I mean, we have to get those. I think they're deemed reported at the end of November. So we have to get our estimate studies in. My understanding will also be subs B dropped possibly in October as well that have to be studied. So the timing issue doesn't work out well. So I can't support it at this time, although I do think we should continue as we had agreed in the last Parliament to do the study. Perhaps breaking it up to the polar icebreaker first because of the rumors of the government going offshore for one rather than getting moving on the Diefenbaker, which many of you know should have been in the water years ago. So at this time, I can't support that study as it is written, but certainly I think we can talk among ourselves to get it working very soon.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. Ms. Vignola, could you...
Madame Vignola, est-ce que vous pourriez proposer, reproposer ce que vous avez dit? Là, j'entends le français. I'm sorry.
Okay. Ms. Vignola, could you repeat your amendment, please?
The amendment was to include in the study the criteria for prioritizing shipbuilders and the criteria for awarding the contract. So I would like that included in the motion. And concerning the date, we do have the estimates, and I agree that with Mr. McCauley, we might have to set some priorities, that's all. Perhaps we could just work out the dates to fit everything in.
Mr. Paul Hoos, I see you're up. I apologize. I'm trying to look at the participant list and the hands up and missing that. So, Mr. Paul Hoos.
Merci.
Thank you. And this should be made clear. How should we ask to have the floor? Do we use the little blue hand or do we raise our hand?
Wheeler, parce qu'effectivement, il y a beaucoup de questions en ce qui concerne la construction navale. Là, je m'entends en anglais.
There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions regarding the shipbuilding. Mr. McCauley, as well as Ms. Vignola, asked questions last June. Questions to PBO with regard to the GSS. I think we have to agree on what we want, because if we have a report that the PBO is actually doing its work, then I think we should wait for those reports before moving forward. Second, the Committee on National Defense did a study on the naval capacity of Canada. That was back in 2018, so we might want to see if there has been any update in the meantime. For me, my priorities are COVID rather, as well as the study on estimates. But I'll talk to you about my motions when it's my turn.
You need to recognize that we're discussing the amendment by Ms. Vignola at this point in time, as she has made the amendment as to the original motion, just for clarification. So discussion further on Ms. Vignola's amendment. Ms. Vignola, do you have anything more to add?
Ben,
The PBO report, as Mr. Polhurst was saying, I believe that report is ready. But I think we have to make a motion so that the PBO report can be tabled. Is this a good assumption or not? I'm not sure. If I may, Mr. Chair, I'm going to answer Ms. Vignola's question. I asked that question to PBO at the beginning of prorogation. They were looking at the law, but the committee can submit the same request. I haven't heard anything from the PBO yet. I don't know how the bill will be drafted or what the PBO interpretation is, so we just have to wait for now. I don't know if they've been able to continue their work during the prorogation. Now I have another point to make, Mr. Chair. Those of you who may have some issues with interpretation, I forgot to say at the beginning of the meeting, if you want to speak French, make sure that you selected the French channel. If you want to speak in English, make sure that you are in the English channel. And if you switch between the two channels, there might be a lag for the sound to change, and that can cause some issues. So I hope this will help you moving forward. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Just a point that I think needs to be reminded in committees that I've been involved with in the past. The reality is that the motions that are presented right now will be taken to subcommittee, at which point in time subcommittee then determines which ones would be proceeded on based on during that process and then brought back to the committee. And I'm assuming that that is the same process that this committee has always followed. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that's the process that we set out. And although as we move forward on this motion, there will be others that will be presented and then discussed. So do we need a vote on the amendment, Mr. Clerk?
Mr. Chair, yes, if I may intervene on that, Mr. Chair, the subcommittee makes recommendations to the main committee. A motion adopted by the main committee doesn't have to be referred to the subcommittee, though the subcommittee may want to make recommendations as to, for example, how to run the study. But once adopted in the main committee, a motion doesn't actually have to be referred back to the subcommittee for consideration. The subcommittee, however, can make recommendations which have to be approved by the main committee. I would suggest that we proceed to a recorded division on the amendment and the main motion, as there has been considerable debate. I had understood Mr. McCauley. I don't know if he wanted to intervene again or not.
No, I'll leave it. I was just going to suggest we just refer to the subcommittee to hash out a general order of stuff once we know about the estimates and everything else.
The chair can always convene a meeting of the subcommittee at a later date to discuss future business and then make recommendations to the main committee, or the main committee can adopt motions right now. As there is a motion on the floor, I would suggest that we should dispose of it. And I would suggest, Mr. Chair, we proceed to a recorded division on Madame Vignola's amendment, if you agree.
I think we should as well.
On the amendment moved by Madame Vignola to the motion of Mr. Weiler, I will call the roll call now. Mr. Garrettson.
The amendment, yes.
Mr. Joe Howery.
On the amendment, yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczak,
On the amendment, yes.
Mr. McKinnon,
Oui, j'appuie.
Mr. Weiler,
I support the amendment.
Mr. Lloyd,
Do not support.
Monsieur Paulus,
No.
Mr. Macaulay,
No.
and finally, Madame Vignola.
Oui.
Not finally.
Mr. Green.
My apologies, Mr. Green. I apologize.
That's okay.
Finally,
you will
Mr.
never be
Green.
allowed to miss me. I promise you that. And on the amendment, I will say no.
I appreciate that. Okay, so that is. There are 6 in favor of the amendment and 4 opposed to the amendment, Mr. Chair.
Carried. So now, any further discussion on the motion as amended? Mr. McKinnon, Mr. Paul Hoos afterwards.
Donc, pour ma part,
So Monsieur Macaulay referred to the following. I believe that we've wanted to have a review of the national shipbuilding strategy. And this strategy has impacts in all the regions of our country. So I believe it is essential that this committee deals with the national shipbuilding strategy. As opposed to what Mr. Green said, I don't think it's some kind of reset. On the contrary, I believe it's been years that we've tried to have the national shipbuilding strategy reviewed. So I think we should support the motion as amended. Mr. Polhus and Ms. Vignola represent regions whose economy relies on shipbuilding. So this is why I'm going to support the motion as amended.
Thanks, and I appreciate what Mr. McKinnon says. It's quite funny when we say we've been trying. I think I've been trying for 5 years. The Liberals have been blocking for most of those years. The study, I'm not sure, maybe it's just semantics, but it's not the NSS. I think we owe it to taxpayers and Canadians to review. It's the actual procurement process, the cost overruns, the delays, and everything else. I think we all agree, all parties agree on the idea of the NSS. I don't think we want to look at that, but rather the actual procurement process. And again, I appreciate Ms. Vignola's amendment, but again, with all the other items that we have, our previous discussions as well before prorogation, that this was going to go well into the new year. I mean, we could spend 16 meetings, I'm sure, just on the JSS or what's going on in Irving right now. So I don't support the motion, period, because I think it's too restrictive of what we actually need to do, and also does not address this looming chance that the polar icebreaker could get offshore, new icebreakers for the Great Lakes, et cetera, could get offshored any moment now, as we've seen. So I think we're doing a disservice to taxpayers, but also to the shipbuilding regions as well, if we don't get it right. And I don't think this motion does that.
Thank you. We are going to go to Ms. Vignola, then Mr. Paul Hoos, then Mr. Kuzmierski, and Mr. Green. I'm going to ask people actually to hit the little raise hand, blue hand. That way I can catch things fast enough, and then follow in order. Ms. Vignola.
Merci.
Thank you. I'd like to respond to what Mr. Macaulay just said. Mr. Weiler, if I'm not mistaken, in your motion, you talked about icebreakers. Are you talking about polar icebreakers or also light icebreakers, medium icebreakers? Are you talking about icebreakers in general or specific icebreakers?
We're talking specifically about the polar icebreakers.
Thank you. Ms. Vignola, still, do you have anything further?
OK. Bon.
Thank you. Mr. Paul Hoos?
No.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to know, I cannot see the feature of the raised hand. Anyway, shipbuilding. Yes, there are many questions to be asked with regard to the national shipbuilding strategy. Some contracts are not followed through in an efficient manner. But given what we have to do, I think the timing is not great. So either we reject the motion and move it later on, or we change the date because the November date is not feasible. Thank you.
Mr. Kuzmirsik?
Thank you very much, Chair. Really do appreciate it. And it's pronounced Kuzmirchuk. Just wanted to get that on the record. Yeah, it's Canadian as maple syrup.
I got to get that Chuck.
No problem at all. You'll get there. You'll get there. I did want to say, you know, this is an important study, and this is an important motion that's being brought forward, and it is a matter of urgency, I feel. You know, in our constituency of Windsor-Tecumseh, we don't have a shipbuilding footprint, although I will say, being in the Great Lakes, we do depend significantly on the Coast Guard and the ships there to patrol our waters in the area. But fundamentally, I do appreciate the incredible significance of the shipbuilding industry, not just to the security and the safety of our country from coast to coast to coast, but fundamentally, this is, to me, when I see shipbuilding, I hear jobs. And in this climate and situation and with COVID, that is absolutely paramount. And I think about, when I think of shipbuilding, I think about not just the direct shipbuilding jobs. I think about the skilled trades and how important the health of our shipbuilding industry is to the development, to the cultivation of skilled trades in this country. And when I think about shipbuilding, I think about also communities that have large steel sector and steel industry, and how important that is to communities that have a large steel footprint as well, and all the workers that are tied to that. And so to me, this is a priority, because this is about making sure that, yes, while we're focused on COVID and the health and safety of Canadians being a top priority, at the same time, it is important that we focus on advancing, protecting, growing jobs, and shipbuilding obviously is a large accelerator and catalyst for that. Again, whether it's skilled trades, whether it's good union jobs, whether it's good steel jobs, it's absolutely critical. So there is, to me, quite an urgency to see this study brought forward in a timely fashion. And I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Green.
Thank you very much. I don't think anybody's disputing how important the jobs are to the shipbuilding industry, just as we're not disputing how important jobs are for veterans or looking at the green economy or any of the other priorities that we had prior to this. And I think the kicker is how overly prescriptive this is, which is why I referenced it being an allusion to turning the page on other discussions that we had prior to the unfortunate and untimely dissolution of Parliament. So, you know, even in my remarks that are going to come after this is dealt with, you know, this is something that was defense procurement with a focus on shipbuilding has always been a priority of this committee in my short time here. I don't think that changes. I think what changes, though, is how we do the work of ordering the work and the studies of this committee. And my preference is to resume, notwithstanding, to be on the record for those who might be tuning in for the first time, we worked through COVID. It's not like we hit pause on this committee and didn't do any work during COVID. We worked through COVID and had identified and prioritized the good works of this committee collaboratively to come up with what should have been a resumption of, at least in my opinion, a full resumption of the work that we had done. So I would prefer to, I'm not going to be supporting this. And I will be reintroducing and understanding that defense procurement for the focus on shipbuilding is critically important. And I think that at the appropriate time, we can work together to draft a motion that is beneficial to the entire, committee, and not just changing our attentions to something in a very prescriptive 16-week November kind of or December drop dead.
Ms. Vignola, I see your hand is up.
You know how important the national shipbuilding strategy is very important for me. We know how many jobs have been created or can be created in Halifax and Vancouver, but it's also a very important issue and industry here in my region. I'm sure you know that from hearing what I've said up to now. I think we need to try to study this very quickly, and that means that we would also study the estimates very quickly. We need to do things properly, and for that reason, so that we can do our work well and serve our communities well and get the jobs that we should be getting, direct, indirect jobs, we have to change perhaps the current form of this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I've heard a few concerns about this motion, and I'd just like to bring forward a couple potential workarounds to address the concerns that were raised. And Mr. McCauley raised the concern about the estimates and how this might impact them. And also Ms. Vignola about the scope of the ships that are going to be covered by this. And so I would suggest two things. One would be to move the date from November to rather have this be presented to the House by the date of December 17th, which would allow more time to do other studies like on the estimates. And likewise for Ms. Vignola to also study the light icebreakers as well.
Okay, I think we basically heard an amendment suggested there. Is that correct, Mr. Clerk?
I did hear Mr. Weiler putting forward some suggestions. However, Mr. Weiler, being the one who proposed the motion, cannot amend his own motion. Another member could move the same amendment, but procedurally, usually the mover of the motion cannot amend their own motion without the unanimous consent of the committee, or to have another member move that amendment.
Thank you. Good point. Mr. McCauley, I saw your hand up.
Yeah. No, I'm just going to add, I appreciate your attempt, Mr. Weiler, to try and accommodate our concerns, but even December 7th is not going to be realistic. I've been working on this for 5 years. We could spend probably 6 months just looking at Irving, the shipyard, much less like all of it, the Coast Guard stuff, the Atlantic Eagle issue with CITT would take months on its own. So while I appreciate your attempt, it'd be wasting our time and a disservice to everyone involved if we rushed it through in just 2 months. We could actually do this for easily, a full year. And I think that was our discussion before prorogation, is we were going to leave it to the end because it would take such a long time. If you want to split it up to just do the icebreaker, because again, there's the concern of the government off sending it outsourcing out of the country, perhaps something broken down like that. But to do the whole package for December, not possible and just not realistic. Although I do, again, I appreciate your attempt to try to accommodate our concerns, but we won't support this because it needs a proper full review, and I think agreement among all of the four parties of how we're going to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Kazmierczak.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Kitchen. Really do appreciate that. I just wanted to ask my colleague, if possible, Mr. Macaulay, if he can maybe suggest a timeline that he believes would be suitable here. And again, recognizing sort of it seems to me there's a recognition that there's an urgency here to discuss this issue, but we want to make sure that that the discussion is fulsome. That it receives the fulsome attention that it requires. So I just wanted to ask Mr. Macaulay if he can maybe comment on timelines that he feels would be appropriate.
Well, I would suggest maybe send it to our planning, because we're spinning our wheels here. We get, and I know I've got other business I want to attend to it, as does Mr. Green and Ms. Vignola. Maybe let's send it to our planning committee of the 5 so they can work out some suggestions. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd have a certain plan, but that may not work for Mr. Green or Ms. Vignola or for your side. So rather than we continue with this back and forth, maybe we'll send it off. I suggest we send it to our planning group so they can hash it out.
Mr. Clerk, are we able to, does that need to be voted on in order to do that?
Normally, once a motion or an amendment is before a committee, the committee can dispose of it only by taking a decision. But there are other things the committee can agree if there's a consent to either withdraw the motion or adjourn the debate. Once it's no longer debating that motion, it can move on to other business, and then business could be taken up by the subcommittee. It's entirely up to the committee's discretion. The committee can decide to adjourn the debate on this motion and proceed to consider other issues. Or the committee could, if it gives unanimous consent, could withdraw this motion from it entirely and deal with it in subcommittee. Also, if it adjourns the debate here, it could deal with it in subcommittee as well. There are some options for the committee if it doesn't want to take a decision on this motion right now.
Thank you for that. Mr. Green.
And I don't know if Bruno's includes referral motions, but would there not be a referral motion that could be in order to have this motion referred to just directly?
Ms. Clerk?
I have seen that happen in the past, and if it is the will of the committee to refer it to the subcommittee, then I would say then yes, that would be admissible if somebody wants to propose that, and then the question can be put to the committee members as to how they wish to proceed.
Point of order.
Point of order, Mr. Gertzen.
Isn't the intent of the subcommittee to set the agenda? And even if the subcommittee passes something, it still has to come back to the main committee to adopt it. I don't think you want to send the idea of a motion of a study to subcommittee to debate. You want to determine at committee level if you want to do the study, and then let the subcommittee determine the agenda as it relates to it. I don't think it's in order to send the discussion over to the subcommittee, which would only have to report back.
Okay. Mr. Macaulay, I see your hand is up.
I appreciate what Mr. Green's doing. I'm going to suggest we vote to adjourn this. I think we all have agreed that we're going to do the shipbuilding study. But I suggest we vote to adjourn this and then allow it to our subcommittee to develop a plan going forward without any restrictions or without any parameters set up right now. Or else ask Mr. Weiler if he'd agree to withdraw his motion.
If I may, Mr. Chair, what Mr. Macaulay is proposing is what's called a dilatory motion. They are non-debatable. Procedurally, the chair is to put the question before the committee, and the committee will vote on whether or not to adjourn the debate on the motion. So my advice to you would be to put the question now, and that should be done by a recorded division pursuant to the order adopted by the House on September 23rd.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And it's actually something that in my head I was recognizing. So it's non-debatable. So Mr. Macaulay's motion is the one we're voting on. And so I'll call for.
And point of order, Mr. Chair, it's not debatable, just to be clear.
Correct.
Okay. Not a motion to adjourn. But can we have a recorded vote, Mr. Chair?
Yes, the motion is on Mr. Macaulay, pardon me, the question is on Mr. Macaulay's motion that the debate be now adjourned. And I will put the question by recorded division. Mr. Garrettson.
No.
Mr. Johari.
I vote against.
Mr. Kosmierczak.
I vote against.
Mr. McKinnon.
Je suis contre.
I vote against.
I vote against.
Mr. Lloyd. I beg your pardon, Mr. Lloyd, you're in favor of the motion?
I vote in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Monsieur Paulus.
Mr. Paulus. I vote for the motion.
Thank you, Merci, Monsieur Paulus. Mr. Macaulay.
Thank you, Mr. Paulus.
Madame Vignola.
Madame Vignola. I vote for the motion.
I also vote for the motion.
Mr. Chair, there are 5 in favor and 5 against. You have a tie, and it is incumbent upon you to issue the tie-breaking vote, Mr. Chair.
I vote for the motion.
To adjourn the debate.
To adjourn the debate and proceed with further vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Paulus, yes. I would like to propose some motions to the committee, if I may.
Monsieur le Président.
I have a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Green was next. Yes, that's correct.
Rappel au règlement.
Point of order.
Mr. Macaulay.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Mr. McKinnon, yes.
Je pense que ce serait utile pour le comité.
I think it would be useful for the committee to know what happens because we just agreed to adjourn the debate. So how are we going to proceed? Is someone going to move 1 or 2 motions? I would like to know what the procedure is here.
Was that the adjourning of the debate was on that first motion, and I would ask that that all members get together to at some point in time to discuss that motion privately, such that that can be put back on the floor at a certain time. But now we would proceed to the next issue, which would be Mr. Green, who I assume would be presenting a motion, and that would be followed. I had Mr. Macaulay as the next person after that, so that's the order I have at this point. And then Ms. Vignola, I believe, is after that as well. So, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Yeah, I think
Mr. President, je m'excuse.
Point of order.
Sorry.
I apologize. Sorry, Mr. Paulus.
Oui. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to tell you that I cannot directly ask that I would like to speak up. So I can only inform you that I would like to speak up by raising my hand in front of the screen. Thank you.
And just for clarification, I believe, Mr. McCauley, you indicated that Paul Hoos was ahead of you?
I saw Mr. Paul Hoos, as much as I'd love to speak.
Okay.
I saw Mr. Paul Hoos signal before me, so.
Certainly, thank you. Ms. Vignola, I see your hand is up.
Oui, c'est pour.
Yes, I'd like to move a motion before the committee, but I will wait for my turn.
You'll be following Mr. Paul Hoos. Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I just raised my hand to be on the speaking list as well, if possible.
Okay. So we will go to Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And before you, I believe I've captured the spirit of the work that we had undertaken prior to the very unfortunate dissolution of this committee, that pursuant to standing orders 108 subsection 2 and 108 subsection 3C, that the committee resume the following studies and activities undertaken during the first session of the 43rd Parliament, and that the evidence heard and documentation received by the committee in relation to these studies be taken into consideration by the committee in this session. The defense procurement with a focus on shipbuilding. 2, the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. 3, greening government strategy. 4, hiring process in the public service. 5, hiring of veterans for the public service positions. 6, review of the Red Tape Reductions Act. 7, departmental results report 2018-2019. 8, subject matter of the supplementary estimates A 2020 to 21 with vote 1A under the Department of Public Works and Government Services, votes 1A and 5A under the National Capital Commission, vote 1A under the Privy Council Office, votes 1A and 5A under the Shared Services Canada, and votes 1A, 20A, and 30A under the Treasury Board Secretariat. 9, that subject matter of supplementary estimates B 2019-2020, vote 1B under the Department of Public Works and Government Services, vote 1B and 5B under the Shared Services of Canada, and vote 1B under the Treasury Board Secretariat. 10, briefing on the new tech security equipment contract. 11, briefing by the Minister of Public Services and Procurement on Phoenix. 12, briefing on the Ministry of Public Services and Procurement on Canada Post. And 13, awarding by the federal government of the $900 million sole source contract to WE, as well as prior contracts to this organization. And that motions sending for documents as adopted by the committee. And Mr. Clerk, I do apologize in advance. These are lengthy, but I do want to make sure these resume as they were critically important. That on May 29th, 2020, meeting 15, that in context of its study of the government's response to COVID-19 pandemic and pursuant to Standing Order 108-1A, the committee send for all briefing notes, memos, and emails from senior officials prepared for the Ministry of Health, the President of the Public Health Agency of Canada, the Chief Medical Health Officer of Canada, and the Minister of Public Services and Procurement between 2010 and the present day, regarding the stockpiling, management, disposal, and replenishment of medical equipment and supplies in the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile, that the committee received the information no later than by the end of this month, October 31st, that matters of cabinet confidence and national security be excluded from the request, and that any redactions to protect the privacy of Canadian citizens and permanent residents whose names and personal information may be included in the documents, as well as public servants who have been providing assistance on this matter, be made by the Office of the Law Clerk and Parliamentary Counsel to the House of Commons, and that these documents be posted on the committee's webpage. That on the June 19th, 2020 meeting, which is our 21st meeting, that in context of this study of the government's response to COVID-19 and pursuant to the Standing Orders 108-1A, the committee send for documents from the Public Services and Procurement containing to the following disaggregated data relating to the businesses owned by underrepresented groups, including Black, Indigenous, women, and persons with disabilities who have engaged with PSPC with regards to the federal government's response to COVID-19. A, 1, how many companies from underrepresented groups have secured contracts with PSPC? 2, the value of these contracts. 3, the number of businesses from underrepresented groups screened and approved as credited vendors. 4, numbers in value of set-aside contracts for these businesses. 5, the number of subcontracts entered into. B, the committee send for all papers and records in unredacted form from Employment and Social Services Canada relating to the federal contractors program, and in particular, 1, all current signed agreements to implement the employment equity agreements. 2, the most current list of contractors covered by said agreements. 3, the most current compliance documentation furnished by each contractor covered by an agreement, including the goal setting report, achievement table, workforce analysis, revised goals for remaining gaps in representation, and explanatory material. 4, the most current documentation of ESDC's compliance assessments for each contractor covered by the agreement, the most recent limited eligibility and bid list, which was 5. 6, all documentation filed in appeal of finding a non-compliance by a contractor to the ministry. 7, all documentation connected to an independent review of an appeal. 8, all documentation internal to ESDC assessing or evaluating the federal contractors program. That the committee received these documents in papers
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
and records under
Point of order.
31st.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Green, we have a point of order.
Moi, je m'excuse sincèrement auprès de Monsieur Green.
I'm sorry, Mr. Green. I know he's reading, but I'm listening to the interpreters. We won't be able to look at the content of this motion based on the interpretation because Mr. Green is reading the motion really fast. So I'm not sure we're able to capture the entire content of his motion. I don't know if he has a translated version of his motion, or maybe if he could share the original copy of his motion. Mr. Chair, I'll let you decide if the committee is able to review such a motion.
Mr. Chair, who have been on this committee will note that these are motions that we've already passed, so they will be familiar with them once they see them. But for the new members, I can certainly appreciate why this would be an important addition. So we do have the translated copies emailed out. Notwithstanding that, Mr. Chair, I'm also happy to go back and read them really slowly.
Point of order.
Please don't.
Point of order.
Mr. Gertson.
Was that the end? Did Mr. Green get to the end?
No, I was interrupting.
I was going to wait till he was done. I didn't want to interrupt. I just got the impression that he was done, but I'll wait till he's done, and then I want to ask a point of order.
Okay. Mr. Green, Chair? Sorry, just for clarification, have you sent the translated documents to everyone in committee, or just to the clerk?
We send them to the clerk as per usual practice.
Thank you. Carry on, Mr. Green.
We can resend them out of courtesy to the members on the group to the entire list. That's fine.
If I may, Mr. Chair, we did receive them right before the start of the meeting. No doubt you're aware, in the absence of a chair, I wasn't able to distribute them at that time. I could try and distribute them to the committee members now. However, I note that the text that I receive has some slight changes to what Mr. Green was reading. I believe Mr. Green has made some very minor modifications. When I was following along, there were some sections that had some slight changes to them. So unfortunately, following along, I can't verify if the text that I have is completely 100%. Mr. Green may be able to speak to that issue, but I did notice some changes in the text that I had that weren't complete in what he was saying.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, for those that were on this committee prior, or you'll recall that out of courtesy, many of the motions that we had conveniently leading up to the prorogation of Parliament provided a courtesy to extend the report back dates on these works that I'm now representing to resume as studies. And as fate would have it, prorogation dissolved this within days of us receiving these critical demand documents. And so I would have it in good faith of the public sector that they would have already been well in advance working on these motions. What I did is add 2 weeks, 3 weeks to the end of this month, October 31st, as an adjustment for the dates that these documents would be returned, understanding that they were already days within being or a week and a half within being returned to our next committee date back in August. So that's the change that has been made.
Thank you. Mr. Green, I think if you would finish with your motion, please.
Thank you very much. And so I will restate that the committee received these document papers and records no later than October 31st, and that departments tasked with the gathering and releasing of the following documents do their assessment and vetting as would be done through the access of information process, and that these documents be posted to the committee's webpage. There is, Mr. Chair, there was also a very apt motion put by my colleague, Mr. McCauley, on the production of papers. I'll leave that to him. It is within my notes here, but I'll leave that to him to reference at his appropriate time should he want to have that expedited as well.
Point of order.
Mr. Gertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In light of the fact that Mr. Green has not distributed this in advance, and especially in light of the fact that the clerk has said that there are inconsistencies what was provided to him, can you, as the chair, confirm to the committee members that this motion is in order?
If I may,
I'm asking on.
Well, that's not really a point of order.
It is a point of order. It absolutely is. I'm asking the chair if he can confirm that this motion is in order. It is absolutely a point of order.
I would think the clerk would be able to do that.
My understanding is that in the first meeting we can.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. The clerk does not decide what is in order and what is not in order. That is the chair's job. The chair can go to the clerk for advice, but it is up to the chair to determine if this is in order. And I'm asking if this motion is in order, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to ask to the clerk for advice. So if we can temporarily suspend for a second so I can discuss with the clerk. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
present, so we will resume the committee meeting. Basically, what in discussions that we've looked at, the information is admissible. It is in order, although it is long and it is extensive, and it appears to be in 3 sections. At this point in time, I think it's best that we debate the issue as a whole, as opposed to the 3 sections. And then once that debate is over, we can sit down and either vote on the whole issue or possibly break it into 3 sections to vote on the 3 sections. So with that said, Mr. McCauley, I believe you're next to have the floor. You're on mute, Mr. McCauley.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Mr. Chair, Mr. Green, thanks for reintroducing basically all the work the committee has agreed to in the past and outstanding. Seeing as we're running short of time, I'm going to propose we vote on this immediately and get it approved so committee can get working on serving Parliament and Canadians again.
Ms. Vignola? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Point of order, please.
Point of order.
Yep.
Mr. From.
May I state my point of order?
Okay, sorry, I didn't know who it was. I couldn't see who was saying. Mr.
Sorry.
McKinnon.
Yes. My question remains. I don't know how we can properly evaluate a motion without of that length and extent without having it in front of us in one or the other, and obviously preferably both official languages.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Vignola, I believe.
Madame Vignola. Allez-y. I'm somebody who is visual, and if possible, I would like to have the motion in written form because I couldn't catch everything when it was being read out. I have to see it in writing. I have quite a long motion myself that I want to introduce, and every member will be given it so that they can see it as it's being read out. So that's what I would ask.
Mr. Kuzmierczuk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And you know, whereas I do appreciate what my colleague MP Green was trying to do with this large sort of motion, I really can't support it. You know, we had a really good start to this committee today. You know, very collaborative, a lot of good discussions, and you know, it just as a committee member, as an MP, I really can't vote on something that I just simply have not seen, have not been able to study, and asking for a snap vote on something as large as that, I think is unfair. I think it goes against the spirit that we're establishing here on this committee in terms of working together and collaboratively, and I just don't think that it would be fair to put us in a position again to vote on something that we haven't seen. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Green, you lost me after about the 9th chapter of the motion, and I really would like to get an opportunity to look at it, to study it, and sort of come back and just be confident in terms of knowing exactly what I am voting for. You know, a journalism professor of mine at Carleton once told me, if your mom tells you she loves you, go and verify. And I think I want to be able to have an opportunity here. And again, I fully appreciate what the member was trying to do here in terms of advancing the work of the committee, but it just would not be fair, I think, for us to vote on something that really we don't have all the details of. And again, as my colleague Madame Vignola had mentioned as well too, I too am very visual, and like I said, I lost the thread of the motion about halfway through, and I just want to be able to have the opportunity here to just read it, study it, and again, I'm sure if everything is in order, we'll be able to move forward on that. But again, I really feel that we need to have this in front of us and be able to read it. I didn't receive, maybe I was the only one, but I didn't receive the actual motion ahead of time from the clerk, and I just think that is, especially with something as large as this, I think that is something that we all sort of need to be able to look at. And again, in the spirit of what we've established in this committee today, I really think that that the proper thing to do here is just simply to for us to go back to get that copy both in English and in French and be able to look at it, make sure everything is in order, and move confidently with something as important as this, especially if it's going to establish the agenda for the entire committee, and especially if this is really going to establish the tenor and the tone of how we work together. Really do think that we need to take a pause here, be able to look at the motion that's being put forward, consider it, and do the right thing, the responsible thing, and vote for it. And again, with full information.
Thank you, Mr. Kazmierczak. And in fairness to the clerk, while he did receive the information he could not dispense it until such time as something the clerk or the chair had been determined. So that's the reason why as you're aware, why you did not receive that. I'm looking at the lists of names, and I'm just, some are still up, but I believe Mr. Gertson, you should be next. Assuming your hand is still up.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. I just want to start by saying to my Liberal colleague that I'm willing to bet my political career that his mother loves him. But I agree with both of what Madame Vignolia said. I certainly am a visual person. I can honestly say that I wouldn't even know exactly what I was voting on if I didn't have this in front of me. Normally, when motions come forward during committee business, and although this might be in order procedurally, but normally there are motions that are a few sentences long, and it's very clear what the intent is. There's a lot to this. So I think that, in fairness, with all due respect, Mr. Green, if you're going to propose something like this in the future, even though the clerk might not be able to distribute it, you know who's on the committee. You may want to send it to them in advance and just say, hey, just to give you a heads up, I'm going to be bringing this forward. And that wasn't the case. So, Mr. Chair, I would move with respect to this motion that we adjourn the debate on it.
That's a non-debatable motion, and therefore we should call for a vote. Ms. Clerk, can we call for a vote, please?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chair. I will beg your indulgence for one moment to get my voting sheet ready, and then I will be able. One moment, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The motion is that the debate be now adjourned, moved by Mr. Gerritsen. And I will start the roll call now. Mr. Gerritsen.
Yes.
Mr. Johari.
Yes.
Mr. Kazmierczak.
Support.
Mr. McKinnon.
Oui, j'appuie.
Yes, I support the motion.
Mr. Weiler.
Yes.
I beg your pardon, Mr. Weiler, I didn't quite hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Lloyd.
Against.
Monsieur Paulus.
Mr. Paulus, I vote against the motion.
Against, please.
Madame Vignola.
Madame Vignola. Ms. Vignola. I'm sorry, Ms. Vignola. I did not hear your voice. Sorry. And I didn't hear the translation of my name. I didn't hear myself being called. No problem. I'm going to vote against the motion.
I'm also going to vote against the motion.
Okay. Mr. Chair, that is 5 votes in favor and 5 votes against. You will need to use your casting vote.
I am going to vote for the motion and ask that we have further discussion on this, possibly at the will of the committee as we move forward. Mr. Paul Hoos, you have the floor.
Mr. Paulus?
Monsieur le Président, je veux bien comprendre actuellement.
I just want to be clear, Mr. Chairman. The motion that Mr. Green proposed has been adjourned, is that right? Yes, the debate has been adjourned on the adjourned on the motion. It has not been adopted. I have 4 short motions, so it should be easy for everyone to follow. The first is that the committee undertake a study of the main estimates 2020-21, invite the Minister of Public Services and senior officials from PSPC.
Mr. Paul Hoos, you're going to present them all 4 and debate separately or one at a time?
Ben, c'est pour simplifier les choses, Monsieur.
Well, to simplify things, I have 4 motions. I can go one at a time, or if that would be easier for people to understand, or I can do all 4, one after the other. I just wanted to make sure that everyone could speak if they wanted to.
Let's do one at a time, and we'll vote on those as we go. Go ahead. So discussion on this first motion.
Could we have that read again, please, Mr. Chair?
Certainly. Mr. Paul Hoos, could you reread, please?
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The motion is as follows, that the committee undertake a study of the main estimates 2020-21 and invite the Minister of Public Services and Procurement and senior officials from Public Services and Procurement Canada to appear.
So I see a number, just for a sec, I see a number of hands that are up, and I don't know whether those were in the past. I'm going to ask people to take down those at this point in time, if they would take your hand down, and then we will ask for people. Okay, can I see hands now? I have Mr. McKinnon.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want a clarification because, as you know, we studied the departmental estimates earlier this year. So Mr. Paulus wants to invite the minister and senior officials to discuss the estimates, but how would this be different from the estimates consideration that we do usually? May I answer directly, Mr. Chairman? It's simply, there is nothing different. It's just a confirmation that the committee has the motion passed to study the estimates and report them back to the House, just to make sure that the minister and the senior officials are invited to appear before the committee. Madame Vignola. I raised my hand to discuss my own motions when the time comes.
Next on the list following Mr. Paul Hoos. Mr. McCauley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. To Mr. McKinnon's point, I don't believe we actually did the mains. I think we did what was the SUPs, because we have such a very odd and out of sort estimates process this year, and I don't recall the ministers showing up for such SUPs, much less studies in the mains. Plus, we obviously were not, because it was in proper committee, we weren't voting on them either. So there'd be appropriate time to do so now.
Thank you. Any other debate? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. Do we want to go recorded vote or show of thumbs? Show of thumbs. Let's show it. Show of thumbs. Thank you. Carried. Mr. Paul Hoos.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
Mr. Paulus, my next motion is pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, including the procurement of medical equipment and the delays created by the COVID-19 pandemic on procurement activities, and that the evidence and documentation received by the committee during the first session of the 43rd Parliament as part of its study of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic be taken into consideration by the committee in the current session.
Mr. McCauley, I see your hand is up. Is that okay? Sorry, it's just the blue hand over here. Thank you. Call for the votes. Show of hands. Sorry,
Mr. Chair, could
Mr. Gertson, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, that's fine. I didn't know which way we were going to vote.
Okay.
If we're doing it in person or.
I'm leaving it up to the discretion of the committee. If you prefer a recorded vote, then I just ask someone to call that.
Okay.
And if not, then I will call for a show of thumbs.
Thanks.
Calling for the thumbs now. And carried. Mr. Paul Hoos.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Paulus, my third motion, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the new tech security equipment contract, that the committee send for all documents, memorandums, and briefing materials related to the new tech security equipment contract, that the documents be provided in both official languages no later than 5 p.m.
Could I just have that read again quickly? I'm sorry that it was breaking up on my end.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study of the new tech security equipment contract. That the committee send for all documents, memorandums, and briefing materials related to the new tech security equipment contract. That the documents be provided to the committee in both official languages no later than 5 p.m. on December 10th.
I did. I just have one question.
Certainly.
Is the motion asking for documents that exist, or is it asking to produce documents?
Mr. Paul Hoos.
Documents that exist related to the NUCTEC contract, so the government contract with NUCTEC.
Seeing no further debate, And not hearing call for a vote, thumbs up or down. And carried. Mr. Paul Hoos.
Oui, la dernière, très courte.
Yeah, the last one, a short one. That the committee undertake a study on the upgrading of federal IT infrastructures. So with the context of the surge of teleworking. So hence my motion.
Paula.
I have a motion that is in line with what Mr. Paulus is saying. Can I move mine? Because mine is more specific.
Consent
Point of
from the
order.
floor. Sorry.
Point of order,
Lloyd?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
In response to Ms. Vignola's concern, I think if we allow the subcommittee to possibly decide, look at all the motions that are on the table and then have the subcommittee decide if there's overlap and then which motions to move forward with and a new proposal to committee at a later meeting, that would be a solution to that issue.
Thank you. Ultimately, in order to change this, Ms. Vignola, my understanding would be that Mr. Paul Hoos would have to have unanimous consent to remove his motion and then to put yours forward. So I'm not certain that you want to do that. Mr. Lloyd has made a suggestion that might be acceptable to the committee. If that's the case, then I would assume that Ms. Vignola would need to present her motion as well, and then they would be looked at by subcommittee.
Oui, j'accepte, je crois que c'est l'idéal, là.
Yes, I agree. I think it's okay to vote on my motion, and then the subcommittee will study both my motion and Ms. Vignola's motion.
No, I have a question, Mr. Chair. I didn't understand what just happened there. So Ms. Vignola's motion, will she still be presenting that?
Correct. She's the next up on the floor to present motions. So I'm assuming that she would present hers when that time comes. Ultimately, though, Ms. Gerson is sure we'd have to unanimously get rid of Mr. Hughes if we were going to present hers at this point in time. So he will vote on his motion, and then when Ms. Vignola presents hers, and then we'll let subcommittee see if there's togetherness with them.
Okay, so she's going to, in order for her to present her motion immediately following the vote on this, we would have to unanimously agree to remove his motion? Is that what you're saying?
No, his motion would go to subcommittee, and Ms. Vignola's motion would go to subcommittee, and the assumption would be that they're similar, and subcommittee would then determine to come back to the committee with one motion on that area.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to intervene on that point, once the main committee adopts a motion, the subcommittee doesn't usually change it. Usually it's discussed at the subcommittee makes a recommendation to the main committee. If the committee wants to adopt Mr. Paul Hoos's motion, then it will be adopted regardless of what the subcommittee says. I just want to make sure that process is clear before moving forward. I have to just want to make sure that I understand what's going on during the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate that. My understanding would have been that the subcommittee would take a look at the two motions being similar, and then maybe, as you've indicated, come back to the committee with some suggestions. But on the floor and on record, Mr. Paul Hughes's motion would be passed, and assuming that the committee would pass Ms. Vignola's as well.
So just as a point of order, and this is what I was trying to get at, will hers be ruled out of order because Mr. Pauluse's had just passed? Because because if hers is so similar, then the chair might rule hers to be out of order. And if that's going to be the case, then I would love to hear, through the debate on this motion, what hers is, so that at least people know what their options are before voting on one that might subject the other to being ruled out of order.
Yes, thank you. I now see where you're leading with this, and I'm going to defer to the clerk for a second to just for any comments he might have.
It's entirely, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's entirely at the discretion of the committee how it wishes to proceed. I reiterate that the normal process is for the subcommittee to make a recommendation to the main committee and then the main committee to vet it. Once a motion's adopted at main committee, I'm not sure what the subcommittee would be discussing. It would make more sense to me, and this is merely a suggestion, that the committee not consider Mr. Pauluse's motion or Madame Vignola's motion at this level if it wants to discuss them at the subcommittee. To adopt both of them here and refer them to the subcommittee might seem to me to be a bit backwards, but then again, maybe I'm not understanding exactly what the committee is planning. But my recommendation might be that if the issue is going to be discussed in subcommittee, it would be premature to adopt them in the main committee first before discussing them in subcommittee.
Thank you for the clarification, and that makes a lot more sense to me as well. I suspect that we should, if in order to do that, then I would ask for Mr. Paulhouse to ask for it to be put to subcommittee versus us voting on the motion.
And the same would go for Ms. Vignola's motion, that they would both be referred to subcommittee?
Correct. But we would not hear Ms. Vignola's motion on that aspect until she presents here, and I assume she has one or two motions, and then she could present it, and both of those would go to subcommittee.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, from Dane Lloyd.
Mr. Lloyd?
Yeah, I would just propose, why can't everyone just table the motions that they want to deal with? We don't have to vote on them today, and then all the table motions can be considered by the subcommittee that can come back to the committee at the next meeting with a proposal for an agenda on an order of motions, and then it can also work on combining any motions that might be duplicative. That's just a possible suggestion here, so that we can consider everyone's motions without having to go through this long, arduous voting process. Just a thought.
Mr. Chair, and I don't want to waste the committee's time, but just to clarify something that Mr. Lloyd is suggesting. Mr. Lloyd, you're suggesting that, for example, we take the text of the various motions and distribute them to the subcommittee members and then allow them to meet to discuss? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, to discuss and then propose an agenda, a way forward, and then committee can vote to support that agenda or amend that agenda at a following meeting. And I think it would just be very quick. It would give everyone the opportunity to put their motions on the floor today, and things like that. But if there's any disagreement, that's fine.
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Lloyd. It rests, Mr. Chair, with how the committee wishes to proceed with Mr. Paulhuse's motion, which is already on the floor. And then if the motions aren't moved here, then we can distribute the text of those various motions to the subcommittee members in anticipation of a subcommittee meeting to be held in the future.
Thank you. So I would ask then, because I would like Ms. Vignola a chance to present any motion that she would, but I would ask whether Mr. Paulhouse might be agreeable to tabling his motion today, and likewise Ms. Vignola table her motion on this area when she gets her chance.
Monsieur le Président, je crois que...
Mr. Chair, I think we all want to reach the same destination, but it's just an issue on proceeding. So how about making an amendment to my motion so that my motion can be carried with the amendment? And that way we will have a complete motion instead of having two motions. Yeah, we can suggest an amendment to your motion.
You can't make that amendment, but Ms. Vignola could make an amendment if that was to how we proceed. Ms. Vignola, go ahead.
Donc, suggestion d'amendement. Que conformément
Amendment suggestion that pursuant to Standing Order 1083C, the committee study and issue as a report recommendations and proposals to improve the efficiency during the pandemic and after of the various computer systems and other technological means in the administration of assistance services and programs, in particular in the context of the administration of online assistance programs and request for routine administrative services, such as, without limiting to it, the processing of immigration files. Mr. Chair?
Mr. Paul Hughes.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, to me, those motions are completely different. My motion was focused on the IT infrastructure, whereas Ms. Vignola's motion is more about management programs, like immigration program management or SERB program management. My motion is more focused on IT infrastructure, so I don't see how those motions are alike.
dans le fond, c'était vraiment.
Well, my motion also is asking about studying the different IT infrastructure, different IT systems. So this is why I thought it was the same topic.
On the amendment. Seeing none on the amendment, I would call for a vote. Those in favor, thumbs up.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry. Yes.
The order adopted by the House states that if there's unanimity, we can proceed without a recorded division. However, in the event that there is any discrepancy or disagreement, and I've been noticing that when we've had disagreement during the committee meeting today, there's always been a recorded division. That is following the spirit of the motion adopted by the House. I might suggest at this point, it doesn't appear that there is unanimity to adopt this. Should we proceed by recorded division then, as per the order adopted by the House?
Yes, I think we should.
All right. And the motion is on the amendment moved by Madame Vignola. And I will call the vote. Mr. Garrettson.
Yes.
Mr. Johari.
Yes.
Mr. Kosmierczak.
Support.
Mr. McKinnon.
Oui, j'appuie.
I support the motion.
Support it.
Mr. Lloyd.
Yes, I will oppose this.
You'll oppose this. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Monsieur Paulus.
Mr. Paulus. No.
No, thanks.
Madame Vignola.
Madame Vignola. Ms. Vignola. I vote in favor of the motion. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I vote in favor of the motion.
I'm sorry, Mr. Green, I didn't hear your response. Are you mute? Can you unmute, Mr. Green? I wasn't able to hear you for some reason. No, we are having a sound issue. Could you give me a sign, thumb up or thumb down, as to how you vote? So you are in favor, Mr. Green, if you can nod, please. If you are in favor, you can nod. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I could not hear Mr. Green, but he indicated.
I am in favor of the motion. Thank you to both Mr. Weiler and my good friend, Mr. Joe Howery, for their administrative support.
Thank you, Mr. Green. 7 in favor and 3 against, Mr. Chair.
Carried. So now we will have the vote on the motion as amended.
I will do the roll call for Mr. Polhus's motion as amended. Mr. Garrettson.
Monsieur.
Yes.
Monsieur le Président, attendez.
Mr. Chairman, yes, go ahead.
Mr. Garrettson, you voted in favor? Thank you. Mr. Joe Howery.
I said yes.
In favor, yes. Thank you, Mr. Joe Howery. Mr. Kusmirchak.
In favor.
Mr. McKinnon.
Je vote oui.
I vote in favor of the motion.
Support.
Mr. Lloyd.
In favor.
Monsieur Polhus.
Mr. Polhus, yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Macaulay, I didn't hear your vote.
Yes.
Thank you. Madame Vignola.
Madame Vignola, Ms. Vignola, I vote in favor of the motion.
Yes, I support.
10 in favor, 0 against, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, Mr. Polhus, I believe those were your 4. We'll go to Ms. Vignola, recognizing that we've gone a little bit over time, but we appreciate of the clerks and the analysts and everybody staying on during this time. So I'm not trying to rush you, Ms. Vignola, but please go ahead.
I will try to do this quickly. Basically, what I want to propose is the creation of a special committee on the Canadian Student Service Grant. Instead of having 4 committees working on this issue, we should have one dedicated committee of 11 members. Would you like me to read the motion? Yes? That the Standing Committee on access to information, that we report the following motion, that we recommend the creation of a special committee to hold hearings to examine all aspects of the design and creation of the Canada Student Service Grant, including those relating to the study, to review the safeguards to prevent conflicts of interest in federal government expenditure policies, government spending, We Charity, and the Canada.
So we can all for a second. Could you just slow down a little bit so that the interpreters can keep up with what you're saying? I realize you want to try and speed up time, but just read it a little bit slower if you would. Thank you.
No problem. I'm not sure where I should start. At the beginning again? So, that the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates recommend to the House that a special committee be created to hold hearings to examine all aspects of the design and creation of the Canada Student Service Grant, including those relating to the study, to review the safeguards, to prevent conflicts of interest in federal government expenditure policies, government spending, We Charity, and the Canada Student Service Grant, the government's decision to select We Charity an Anglophone organization that is unilingual to implement the Canada Student Service Grant and the administration of the Canada Student Service Grant and We Charity. 1, that the committee be composed of 11 members, of which 5 shall be government members, 4 shall be from the official opposition, 1 shall be from the Bloc Québécois, and 1 from the New Democratic Party. 2, that changes in the membership of the committee shall be effective immediately after notification by the whip has been filed with the clerk of the House. 3, that membership substitutions be permitted, if required, in the manner provided for in Standing Order 114.2. 4, that the members shall be named by their respective whip by depositing with the clerk of the House the list of their members to serve on the committee no later than 3 days following the adoption of this motion by the House. 5, that the clerk of the House shall convene an organization meeting of the said committee no later than 5 days following the adoption of this motion by the House. 6, that the committee be chaired by a member of the official opposition. 7, that notwithstanding Standing Order 1062, in addition to the chair, there be 1 vice chair from the official opposition, 1 vice chair from the Bloc Québécois, and 1 vice chair from the New Democratic Party. 8, that quorum of the committee be as provided for in Standing Order 118, and that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence printed when a quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 1 member of the opposition and 1 member of the government. 9, that the committee be granted all of the powers of a standing committee as provided in the standing orders, as well as the power to travel accompanied by the necessary staff inside and outside of Canada. 10, that the committee have the power to authorize video and audio broadcasting of any or all of its proceedings. 11, that the committee continue all of the business of the following committees: the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, the Standing Committee on Finance, the Standing Committee on Official Languages, and the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, and that the documents and evidence received by each of these committees be deemed to have been received by the said committee, including the documents provided. That the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the Minister of Finance, and the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, and the Leader of the Government in the House be among the witnesses ordered to appear from time to time as the committee sees fit. End of motion.
I see Mr. Gertson, your hand is up.
Right after Ms. Vignola finished telling us that she's a visual person and preferred to have these long motions in front of her, she then subjects us to one from herself, which I find slightly ironic. Again, I mean, this is quite a cumbersome motion with a lot of information in it. And Mr. Chair, I know, I guess at first, without the benefit of having the opportunity to look at this, to review it myself, I'm curious if you can weigh in on whether or not you, as the chair, believe this motion to be in order, given the fact that it's requesting a whole whack of stuff outside of the mandate of this committee. Can you rule on that? And then if you deem that it is in order, I would like to speak to it.
I don't see any reason to rule it out of order.
Okay, so thank you for that. I appreciate you taking the time to review it and to come to that conclusion. I can only assume that you had the luxury of having it in advance. I really wish that I had too. So there are a few of these motions coming forward, and I can respect that, and I think that there is an opportunity to create the proper forum to get this information that the opposition is after, and I think that's entirely appropriate. I know that the NDP have also brought something very similar forward to PROC, and of which is the committee that I sit on. So I don't know how this would work if this one was adopted, but so was the one at PROC. It would appear to me as though we need to get some kind of consensus as to. I mean, personally, I as a member of PROC, I liked the motion that Ms. Blaney brought forward, as it really struck the chord of trying to set the right tone in terms of the objectives of the motion, and then let the committee do as it sees fit as it moves forward. But I mean, I guess I'm really interested to hear from the NDP, and I hate to put you on the spot, Mr. Green, but I'm curious where the NDP is on this, given that they have a very similar motion to this, of which, if I can be completely honest, my preference is that one. But thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm finished.
Thank you. We'll go Mr. Green, then Mr. Paul Hoos, and then Mr. McKinnon.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to compare them side by side. I do know that Ms. Blaney has worked with her colleagues from across the parties to kind of draft something at that committee. And quite frankly, as you heard in my earlier motion, I personally, maybe, I don't know if I maybe going a little bit rogue of the party, but I personally was open to even exploring that in this committee. And so, I think that at this particular time, if we let that get kind of worked out at PROC, which kind of sets the tone for all the rest of the committees, we won't get caught in a situation where we have these dilatory motions bumping up against each other. And, at the very least, I just want to make sure procedurally that I'm not missing anything between the two motions that have been put side by side. So, at the very least, I would ask for the consideration that this also be, put out as a notice of motion, as mine will end up being put out, and we get a chance to kind of look at them and see where we're at to make sure we're not duplicating work.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Paul Hoos.
Point of order. Was that a motion to adjourn, Mr. Chair?
No, I wasn't moving a motion to adjourn. I wasn't, to be clear, on the record.
Sorry, no. Mr. Paul Hoos.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very interesting motion, of course, given the situation and the We Charity scandal before us. Of course, we want to get through this. But like my colleague said, this is just a question of having enough time to read the contents to perhaps propose amendments. It's too complex to use that route now, so I move the same. Let us put this motion to a later date. After that, I would move the adjournment of this committee sitting.
Mr. McKinnon.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair?
Right.
Monsieur Paul Hoos has moved to adjourn the debate. If I understood him correctly, I believe he moved to adjourn the debate. In that case, that question has to be put without debate or amendment. Do you want me to call the roll for that?
Sir, just for clarification for me, is that correct, Mr. Paul Hoos? I interpret it to be that once the vote was over, that we would basically move to adjourn, but I may be wrong on that.
Chair, if I may. That's exactly right. What I mentioned is that we will vote to defer the this motion until a later date to give us enough time to read it, and then I would like to adjourn the sitting of this committee.
So Monsieur Paulhus is moving to adjourn the debate. So the question is on the motion to adjourn the debate. Mr. Garrettson.
Yes. Did you get that? Yes.
I did, thank you. Mr. Johari.
Yes.
Mr. Kuzmierczak.
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon.
Je vote oui.
Mr. Weiler.
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd.
Yes.
Monsieur Paulhus.
Oui.
Mr. Macaulay.
Yes.
Madame Vignola.
En cohérence avec mon idée de laisser aux gens de lire, le temps de lire, oui.
Mr. Green.
Yes.
That is 10 in favor and 0 against for adjournment of the debate, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And seeing as we are now at 1:47, and I do believe that I did not catch the French interpretation. I'm not certain whether we still have our interpreters with us, but I guess at this point in time, I will entertain motion from the floor on ending the meeting.
So moved, Mr. Chair. So moved.
Okay. Thank you. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I want to thank the clerks, and I want to thank the interpreters for their time and the extra time, and the analysts with us. It's a tremendous thing to have you all here today. It's a great chance to meet with you. I look forward to, hopefully we'll get to meet in person at some time soon. And as we move forward, we will see. I really enjoyed hearing the discussion and the appearance, and hopefully we will continue to see the people working together such that we can continue to have this committee progressing for the betterment of all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you.